Welcome to Businesstalk podcast. I am your host Deepak from India. Today we have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Nathan Dietz, research professor at the University of Maryland's School of Public Policy, research director at the Do Good Institute, and co-investigator for the interdisciplinary Maryland Democracy Initiative as our distinguished guest on the podcast. With more than 2 decades of experience in government, academia, and the non-profit sector, Dr. Nathan's work centers on civic engagement, volunteering, philanthropy, and social entrepreneurship. He leads research and evaluation projects for Maryland's Department of Service and Civic Innovation and has published extensively in top journals on non-profit management and community psychology. Before joining Maryland, he held senior research roles at the Urban Institute, the Partnership for Public Service, and the Corporation for National and Community Service. Dr. Nathan holds a PhD in political science from the University of Rochester. To learn more about Dr. Nathan Dietz's work and explore the initiatives of the Do Good Institute, please visit the link provided in the podcast description. In today's episode, Dr. Nathan Dietz shares insights from his research, social connectedness and generosity, how associational life and social connections influence volunteering and giving, and vice versa. Let's not keep you waiting. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nathan Dietz to the conversation. Dr. Nathan, we are deeply honored by your presence and grateful for your time with us today.
No, I'm glad this worked out, Deepak. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. Professor, how does your finding that volunteering and giving reinforce each other change the way we think about time versus money in generosity?
hmm Well, that I think is one of the major findings for the report that we're going to be talking about, because I think a lot of people, when they talk about giving and volunteering, they think that intuitively people treat those as substitutes. And if you're some people give time because they have more time than they have money, if they have charitable impulses at all. Some people give money because when they have more money than time, and people sort of sort themselves into two camps. There are volunteers and there are donors. But in real life, that doesn't work that way. I think the people who volunteer are also much, much more likely to give, and the people who give are much, much more likely to volunteer. I should qualify it though, because this is going to come up later on. But if you look at formal volunteering, that is volunteering through or for an organization, not a group, not a loosely organized community group or group of friends or neighbors, but an actual established organization. Formal volunteering. Um, Formal volunteering is actually not very prevalent in America. Uh, the the data that I used for this report comes from the official data collection. It was the U.S. government's official data collection on an annual basis from 2002 through 2015. And now the data collection is done every 2 years, but it's from a supplemental survey to the current population survey, which is the government's main data source for labor force information, like the unemployment rate. The CPS is conducted every month by the Census Bureau, and they almost always have a supplemental survey on a special topic. So we had a special topic survey supplement on volunteering, where we also added a question about charitable giving in 2008. But the volunteer supplement was done from 2002 through 2015. And for this report, I also pulled in data from another supplement on civic engagement, which was conducted not on a regular basis, but between 2008 and 2012. Um, so, thinking about it, I think when you look at volunteering and giving, uh, volunteering only about 25%. No more than 30% until very recently of all American adults did any volunteer work over the past year. And as far as giving to charity, giving any amount of $25 or more, only about 50%, maybe a little bit more, but not very many people, if you think about it, gave money to charity. So we're not talking, if you use those numbers as baselines, we're not talking about activities that are actually very prevalent, which makes them more important. If you want to encourage them, we have a lot of growing room to try to encourage more activity.
Professor, since prior volunteering boosts later giving more than the reverse, how should organizations balance efforts to recruit volunteers versus fundraise?
I think uh, in the same way as people tend to think about volunteering and giving as substitutes for each other, I think organizations could do more. Many organizations are very good about this, and especially recently because I think the message is starting to percolate throughout the sector, throughout the nonprofit sector. But I think many organizations tend to treat volunteers and donors as two disjoint groups. You have the people who give money. A lot of times they give a lot of money to the organization, and they are, they're handled by the development people, and then the program within an organization. And then the program people who actually help the organization carry out its mission-related activities, those are the people who engage with the volunteers. So it's entirely possible within an organization for the volunteers and the donors just never to interact and never to know what the other group is doing. I think the far-sighted organizations in the sector are the ones who encourage volunteers to give and encourage donors to come by and volunteer every now and then, maybe and try to build that interest and engagement level. Um, I've heard anecdotally from a friend who's worked in the sector here in Washington, D.C. for a long time that some organizations, when they approach their volunteers and say, "Hey, would you ever be interested in donating money?" Um, the volunteers kind of sound they almost sound crestfallen. They sound like they wonder whether or not their volunteering has not been enough. That maybe they've disappointed the organization by only being volunteers. And the organization can actually, not only set their minds at ease, but really encourage people to give in different kinds of ways, just by raising the issue. It just never occurs to very many people. So just by raising the possibility with volunteers and donors, you can probably achieve more crossover if you're a nonprofit organization between those two groups.
Professor, why do religious congregations stand out as especially powerful drivers of both volunteering and giving compared with other types of groups?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a well-known finding, and I think there are a couple of reasons why that's the case. One is that when it comes to institutions, I'm not talking about nonprofit organizations, but societal institutions that encourage volunteering and giving, really. I think because charitable encourage charitable impulses, try to encourage people to recognize the value of acting charitably. Um, there are many more of those institutions that are designed for younger people than there are for full-grown adults. And when you're young, those impulses, those charitable impulses, tend to be instilled by your family, if you're lucky. They tend to be instilled by your school, especially at the K through 12 level. Again, that needs to be purposeful, but it happens for a lot of people that's where they get exposed to the idea that being charitable being actively charitable is a good thing and worth, benefits you and benefits the people who actually receive the outputs of your charity. But once you're away from home, away from your nuclear family, and once you're out of school, there are not very many opportunities for adults to actually engage in those kinds of activities. And for a lot of people, the congregations that they belong to, if they encourage people to act charitably, and most do, then that's one of the few places where adults get that sort of encouragement. Um, the workplace can be another. I think a lot of companies are realizing the value of encouraging people to volunteer and give. It doesn't just help charitable causes. It helps promote kind of team activity, pro-social activity within the organization, which pays dividends for the business. It's a good way to manage a workplace. Um, and then also you have you have other community organizations, but I think as far as repetition and regularity of engagement with community with societal institutions, I think the church activities, congregational activities, that's the way where most people who are adults, get that regular reinforcement.
Professor, what are the most practical measure level levers like associations and networks that communities can use to strengthen generosity?
Yeah, I think when it comes to what communities can do, I think that most communities in America And we're pretty lucky as far as this goes because I don't think it's the case in every country. But in a lot of communities in America, there are a lot of organizations that are not for profit that have different missions, different modes of activity, different ways of carrying out their mission. Um, some work with government to help government implement its policies. They receive grants or contracts for state and local governments to perform services that government, really doesn't have the comparative advantage of doing. It's much more efficient for them to hire people who are experts to actually provide those services. In other cases, you have purely community-based organizations that depend on regular engagement with people, just people in groups to generate their resources and to carry out the activities that are most important. Um, Community leaders, especially elected officials within communities, I think can play the biggest role in trying to encourage more generosity by just encouraging organizations to open up their activities to uh, to community groups and members of the community more often. Um, I think a lot of nonprofits actually are pretty good at that, and they do a good job of engaging with the people who are already engaging with them. They're happy to keep them around, and it's worth their while to make sure that they have the incentive to keep coming by. Uh, but community leaders, I think, could do more to encourage organizations to be more outwardly focused. I had a great conversation with somebody from a national organization here in America who was talking about strategies that sector leaders, not community group leaders or not local leaders, but national leaders in the nonprofit sector can use to try to encourage more generosity. And she said that what could happen is that if you have a community-based organization, a civic organization that's sort of like the welcome wagon, they welcome people into the community when they're newly moved in. The welcome wagon typically has told people about, okay, here's where City Hall is. Here's how you get in touch with local officials. Um, Here are the grocery stores and things like that. Just the things that people would want to know once they move into a community. If you add to that list, here are the places where they really need volunteers. Here are the causes that are most important to this community, and here's how you can help by getting active and getting involved in those causes. Then that could play a huge role.
Professor, how can local leaders turn informal neighborly interactions into greater formal voluntary and charitable giving?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like local leaders would necessarily need or want to play much of a role in encouraging that kind of activity. Um, but actually, I think since the pandemic, I think we've all realized uh, that how important it is for local leaders to provide places for people to just be, for people to just spend time together outside of the workplace, outside of the house. Just what we call third spaces, I think end up being really important as kind of functional elements of civil society. I think just finding places and encouraging places where people can just go and spend time together, meet on a regular basis, because we're going to talk about group involvement and how important that is. But uh, group involvement, group involvement that brings people out of their home, takes people out of the workplace, and gets them working together or just meeting together in a place that isn't owned by that none of them owns. I think that ends up being really effective because it provides a place where people could actually, start thinking about what community problems look like and what solutions might be most effective. And community leaders, I think, are starting to realize how important it is to encourage the growth of those third spaces. Um, they can do it. Some community, some organizations, big national organizations, are starting to realize the importance of this themselves. Like the Walmart Corporation is getting really involved in trying to study social cohesion, only because they have a third space where a lot of people go and they bump into each other sometimes with their shopping carts, but they interact with one another informally, and they're fixtures within the community. So they're always going to be there. They'll always have the capacity to play this role. But the leaders of Walmart are now starting to realize, okay, because we have these resources, because we have this opportunity, let's capitalize on that. Starbucks is very much in the same vein. They're trying to encourage people to come in and spend time together rather than just grab their coffee and take off. Um, but community leaders in cities, especially, I think are doing a much more purposeful job of trying to figure out ways of creating places, third spaces where people can just get together.
Dr. Nathan, your work suggests social trust and connectedness often work indirectly through group membership. How does that refine our understanding of social capital?
Yeah, uh, that's really important because I don't think that it redefines the concept of social capital. I think it refines and further clarifies the concept of social capital. Um, I'm going to use the idea of social capital that was put forward about 30 years ago now by Robert Putnam in the book The Bowling Alone. I mean, I think that's where most people came into contact with the term. It was used before then, but I'm going to use Putnam's characterization of the concept. In Putnam's view, it was group involvement in traditional community groups that really form that really uh, uh, acted as the mechanism for generating social capital in America. And the form of the actual engine, the main ingredient of social capital, I think was trust in others. Um, and the idea behind trust being the basis of social capital is that when people trust each other, it's just easier to reach agreement on what to do. It's easier to enforce agreements about what to do. Like, hey, we agreed to do this. You don't need to, it doesn't need to be confrontational. It just needs to be a reminder. This is something we both want or we all want. So, this is what we promised to do. Just FYI. I mean, that's typically how social capital is generated and sustained is by high levels of trust in other people, especially people who are not, part of your family or part trusted coworkers or anything like that. If you can trust just regular people in the community who you don't know very well, then your community is likely to have high levels of civic health. So um, that's how social capital interacts. The idea that the importance of group involvement is it actually acts as the main catalyst to uh, more focused activities like volunteering and giving. And those activities actually, those are beneficial for the people who engage in those activities. People talk about the warm glow of donating money, and people talk in great detail about the benefits of volunteering to the volunteers. Um, so people want to do those types of activities. And if you do them within groups, then you not only get those benefits for yourself, but you also realize the benefits of interacting with other people. And both those things kind of point in the same direction toward encouraging further involvement for people. And when that happens, trust levels increase and social capital is generated. But social capital is really, in the report, I talk about how social capital is kind of an intermediate step. It doesn't really drive very much, but it facilitates the relationship between group involvement and volunteering and giving just because it generates trust, and trust is really important. A really important byproduct of group involvement, and it's also a pretty strong determinant of volunteering and giving as a result of group involvement.
Professor, what did you learn about who is most likely to start or stop volunteering and giving each year? And why does that churn matters for nonprofits?
Mhm. The I think in general, the level of churn I think really surprises people when they look at stats on volunteering and giving because the volunteer rate doesn't really change very much from year to year at the national level. It has changed, and when it increases by a percentage point or two, then people jump for joy because that's actually a big increase in context. The giving rate hasn't been studied nearly as much as in in term in the uh, uh, research on research and industry around charitable donations, the giving rate hasn't been studied nearly as much as the total amount of money given to charity. And In both cases, you have trend lines that are pretty stable. You have the volunteer rate that is that's pretty stable from year to year. You have um, total giving rates. You know, the percentage of people who give anything to charity; those are also pretty stable. And the most important statistic of all for the nonprofit sector, I would say, the total amount given to charity of money. That's also been pretty stable, and it's been actually on a slowly increasing trend line up until very recently, even controlling for inflation. So when you look at those statistics, I think it masks the fact that in all that in all those activities, especially the rates of participation, you actually do see a lot of churn. You don't see a lot of churn in the total dollars given to charity, only because most of that total amount is driven by big donors. So, you know, big donors are always going to give a lot of money, and and almost there's very little churn among that group of people. But when you look at individual level volunteering and individual level giving, there is a lot of churn. So there really aren't, it's not the case. We don't talk about it that much in this report, but it's not the case that different kinds of people, are more likely to uh, take up giving or take up volunteering than the normal sorts of people who are likely to volunteer or give in general. Um, the same people who are more likely to give and volunteer are the same people who are more likely to start giving and start volunteering and the least likely to drop out. So the action, I think, in the churn that is part of the definition of volunteering and giving rates has to do with the people who are less likely to volunteer and give. You know, they're the people who are probably going to have a less consistent track record over time of giving and volunteering. And that means that those are the people that I think nonprofit organizations should be focusing on. I'll tell you the benefit of that, and you see this more in volunteering than you do with giving. As far as I know, you might see it with giving as well, but I know you see it with volunteering. But people who are least likely, in many cases, the people who are least likely to volunteer or less likely to volunteer than other groups actually contribute more service. They spend more time volunteering once they've made it over that threshold. If you can get those people to start volunteering, they'll actually be more likely, they'll contribute more hours of service than people who are more likely to volunteer. And I think with that knowledge, I think nonprofit organizations should really try to diversify the outreach that they're conducting already, trying to reach new volunteers and new donors. It's worth their while to try to engage people who maybe the hit rate is lower. They're less likely to actually respond positively to appeals to give or to volunteer because when they do, they may be more likely to they may be stronger volunteers and stronger donors pound for pound in terms of the actual amount of contributions they make.
Professor, in what ways do volunteering and giving act as gateways to deeper civic behaviors, such as group participation and voting?
Mhm. That uh, I think what most people, this is a generalization of what I said about giving and volunteering in response to your first question, but I think many people don't realize just how positively associated all types of civic engagement are with one another. You know, if you're more likely to if you're more likely to volunteer, you're more likely to give, and vice versa, and those relationships are pretty strong. But there are also pretty strong relationships between volunteering and giving and other forms of civic engagement. So it's not just measures of social connectedness and social cohesion, and it's not just voting. It's the if you can encourage volunteering and giving, then you can encourage and you put the conditions in place that make volunteering and giving more prevalent, then you're going to strengthen civil society in just about every other conceivable way. I think the key is just to get people to realize that uh, the key is to get people to realize that community problems are all over the place. They come in all shapes and sizes, and they require a lot of different types of solutions. So, and unless your community is very small and very insular, then you're not likely to be limited to participation only in a particular way. You know, you can make positive contributions toward community problems in all kinds of ways, and I think that. I think that community groups and community leaders can can play a really important role when it comes to encouraging participation in all aspects of civic life, just by making people realize that just because you're a volunteer or just because you're a donor, that doesn't mean that, that's all anybody wants from you. That there are all kinds of other opportunities for you to contribute to your community.
Professor, given the limits of current national data, what new questions or measures would you add to better capture generosity and social connectedness?
Yeah, um, that's a good question. I think we need more when it comes to the data that we collect. I think we do need more measures of social cohesion. I think we need especially more measures of pro-social attitudes. That's been a constraint in the work that I've done with the current population survey data, the Census Bureau, and this is not a knock on them. I understand why they take this approach, but they don't like to ask questions about attitudes because um, they well, for a couple of reasons. One is that people have a harder time answering questions about their attitudes or their beliefs than they do about their activities. So it's harder to write a question that generates the type of data that you want. Um, Also, attitudinal questions tend to generate more suspicion or um, uh, negative responses. So for a project that depends critically on a high response rate, then the Census Bureau is really adamant about trying to keep questions away that might turn people off and encourage them to drop out of the survey sample. So I think because of that, we don't have enough high quality data on pro-social attitudes, pro-social beliefs, uh, the types of questions that people use when they study motivations to volunteer and motivations to give. I think we have national data collections like that in other countries, like Denmark and the Netherlands, but we and Australia too, for that matter. But I think we could have more. We really need more of that in America because we don't know enough about why people, what people have in mind when they take advantage of opportunities that are made available.
Dr. Nathan, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question. If policymakers had to choose just a few priorities to reverse declines in giving and volunteering, which interventions would you put at the top of the list and why?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think in the past year, past 2 years or so, uh, the U.S. government has actually made a really important change in tax law that I think will encourage more people to give money to charity. The in America. Um, I think a lot of people tend to think that the amount of money that charities sector wide are able to take in from donors is driven by the impulses of big donors who have an incentive to give to charity because they can deduct the amount of money that they gave to charity from their adjusted gross income. And that means they pay fewer taxes than people who don't donate to charity. That's true, and that's a really strong incentive for people. But it's also it also the landscape for large donors changed because of the last big tax law that was passed in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That increased the amount of money that you would take for the standard deduction. And if you don't take the standard deduction, that's when you itemize on your taxes. That's when you can get the tax break from giving to charity. But if you increase the standard deduction, and I apologize if this is getting too technical, but if you make it less convenient and attractive for people to itemize on their taxes as opposed to taking the standard deduction, which makes tax filing much easier, um, it, then you reduce the number of people who actually itemize, and you reduce the number of people who have a strict incentive to give to charity. So that change took place a few years ago, and I hope people have been surprised by this, but it really hasn't changed the amount of money that the charitable sector has been able to take in from donors. It may change the individual donor behavior at the margins for certain people now and then, but it hasn't made an impact on the big bottom line. What I think people are thinking about now, when they look at when they look at another change that was made in the tax law as a result of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, I guess they're calling it. Um, but they actually give a small charitable deduction to everybody, regardless of whether or not you itemize on the rest of your taxes. And what that should do is increase the number of people who have a tax incentive to give to charities, maybe who wouldn't have had one in the first place. And if you do that, I personally think that that's going to make a big difference because that's something that's going to provide an entryway to sustain giving for people who wouldn't maybe have had that particular incentive before that. And if you do that, and given what we know now about the relationship between giving and volunteering and other types of civic activities, I think it's going to encourage people to just think more charitably and respond to opportunities that they have to help solve community problems and be active members of civil society. Um, when it comes to volunteering, I think there are a lot of people who talk about incentives that the government can use to encourage people to volunteer. Uh, in my experience, I think a lot of those it's not as easy to figure out how to use tax law or things like or mechanisms like that to encourage volunteering because you don't get a tax break for volunteering, and in fact, nonprofit organizations aren't even allowed to count the resources that in many cases, most cases, the resources the volunteers provide on their tax returns, which they file. So nobody really has an incentive to keep track of how much volunteering people do, except for government surveys. And what gets measured gets managed. So that's part of the problem with volunteering. Uh, but really, I think a lot of people treat volunteering as something that, it's somebody else's responsibility to encourage. Some people want to do it, some people don't. If you want to do it, great. If you don't, then you should be left alone. Well, you know, I, I understand that. That's the easy response. But if you actually do want to try to encourage more volunteering and more service activities in general, then I think the most effective way to do it is to try to reach out to young people first of all, and second of all, try to reach out to people who might not have exposure to a lot of opportunities ordinarily. National Service, AmeriCorps, which is the agency that I worked for almost 10 years, has been in force now for 30 years. And they have consistently been the place that been the main government sponsor for national service programs that give young people, especially service opportunities. Now you're starting to see a lot of state governments take on that responsibility themselves and take advantage of this opportunity. Um, I work for the Maryland Department of Service and Civic Innovation, doing evaluation work for them. And I think in the case of Maryland, Governor Moore has been really influential. He's made this a priority, and it's been contagious. I think other state leaders in other states are following his example. But he's realized how important service is to Maryland communities. He's also realized how important exposure to service opportunities are for workforce development and professional development for especially for young people who maybe don't really know how to acquire workforce skills. Um, he's put together the programs that DSCI manages, Department of Service and Civic Innovation, um, because he realizes how important it is to give people not just professional development training, but also exposures to opportunities to serve. And if you combine those, and you can get people to realize that working for a mission-based organization is service, and it should encourage you to do more service. But also, if you know how to work with others effectively, that's going to make you a better employee. That's going to make you more of an asset to organizations. So even for-profit organizations, when the programs were getting set up, I was in the room when some of these conversations were happening, but they came to the organizers of of this new department before it was actually established, and they said, "Hey, are these programs only for nonprofits? Because we could actually benefit from this too. We love the idea of workforce development programs that train people to be community minded because we're trying to manage a community ourselves. We think of our workforce as a community, and community minded employees are going to be much stronger assets for our organization than people who just come in and punch the clock. So, I think I think those types of programs take, of course, dedicated resources and dedicated time by policymakers. But I think I think they're going to pay dividends uh, in terms of strengthening communities, especially if they start to happen at scale. I think you're going to see those policy levers actually play a big role and not just encouraging more giving and volunteering, which helps the nonprofit sector, but strengthening civil society nationwide.
Thank you, Dr. Nathan Dietz, for sharing your insights on how social connectedness and association's life shape generosity, volunteering, and giving. We hope this conversation inspires our listeners to reflect on their own connections, communities, and contributions. We appreciate your time and thoughtful discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deepak.